She is too kind. I'm humbled and appreciative of this community. I talk to a lot of different communities. I talk to obviously our advisory policy board. I'll talk to states. I'll talk to local agencies. I talk to constituents everywhere. I'll be honest with you. This body probably has a greater opportunity to impact the entire ecosystem for good than many of those bodies. Because while I operate at a national information sharing perspective level, you have the tangible day-to-day interactions with agencies. You are the place that enables those agencies to be successful. And so I'm humbled that I have an opportunity to talk to you today. Let me find the remote, and I was told down advances the slide, and it does. Okay. The need for national information sharing has never been greater. We're at a point where I believe we're at an inflection point where the ways of the past, the ways that we've done information sharing, the ways that we've managed our systems in the past just no longer will suffice. It's no longer about criminal investigation and apprehension alone. You know, there was a time where the criminal justice process started with the event, started with, as we would say, the boom, right? And then the investigation would ensue. Following the investigation, the prosecution might turn into incarceration, management of recidivism, but everything started with the event. And I will tell you that while that is absolutely still a core facet of the role that the FBI plays, an increasing amount of our attention, of our investment, is going what I'll call left of the boom. Understanding the threats, understanding tips that we have received, understanding patterns, and trying to get beyond the notion of crime prosecution and move to a place of crime prevention, if you will. So the goal, if you will, has increased to a much broader spectrum. Threats against our schools and school swatting are right now at an all-time high. We have taken some steps within the CJIS division to implement a national swatting database. I'll tell you that the moment we had one interview around that swatting database and how we were going to be focusing on school swatting, the individual that we put out front to discuss school swatting was he himself then swatted. Yeah, he's been swatted 3 more times since that. It's devastating. He's a CJIS employee. He's one of my friends. But because he stepped into this space, he made himself a target. The FBI is sharing increased threat information really via all the tools that we have, but I've listed a few here through Index, NCIC, inlets, and most recently through phone calls. This notion that everything has to be done through push or pull technologies, we've kind of gone back to some basics, and we are becoming more comfortable with this notion of when you know of a threat, pick up the phone and call somebody. The impact of our border crisis on crime throughout this country. The director previously talked about the drug epidemic and the numbers of drugs that are coming across the southern, I will add, and our northern borders. Our borders have become a major issue in crime, and yes, it's still up there. I needed to check and make sure my slide was current. The fact that we have an increased number of people attempting to purchase firearms that really should not be purchasing firearms. So purchases by prohibited individuals. Being able to not only deny the purchase, but to be able to understand the patterns and the behaviors of those individuals that are trying to purchase a firearm outside of a legal process. Threats from organized crime, I'll keep going. Whenever you get back there, I'll catch up. Threats to organized crime, nation-state actors. Again, we talked about the southern border, but also China, Russia, our national adversaries that have made it their objective to disrupt and misinform. There, I'll catch up. Threats from crime, nations. Also, law enforcement resource challenges. Your constituents, the people that you work with every day, having to make do with less, fewer officers, lower budgets, increased scrutiny, increased public awareness of everyone's activities. There's an increase in the assaults and killings of law enforcement officers. I would categorize this as an epidemic. So far this year, there have been 14 law enforcement officers, felonious line of duty deaths. That's higher than it was last year, and last year was on pace to be one of the highest in the past. We are now on pace to be one of the highest ever with regard to felonious killings of law enforcement officers. 12 accidental deaths as well during that time. So there's all of those things. This is the environment that we live in now, and more. And so the title there, the need for nationwide information sharing, has never been greater. But we have our challenges. By the way, my slides aren't near as good as Dr. Barnett Ryan's slides. I'm sorry, she does a much better job of that than I do. I really just got talking points here. So if you think of slide preparation, Cindy's done a much better job. So the first point that I want to make here is that information has to be available when and where it maximizes value. And I say that through both push and pull technologies. One of the challenges that we have is that we at the CJIS division will collect, and we will correlate this information, and then we'll make it available to you if you come ask me the right question for it, if you pose the right query. We've got to get to a place that this information is available not just when you query something, but when we know you're going to be facing or you're going to be encountering something, to be able to manage that before the boom kind of criminal justice involvement. We have differing law enforcement roles, and which each have very specific needs. For a long time within the CJIS division, we talk about who our customer is, and it was very easy to say law enforcement is our customer. I have a list of about 32 different roles that are law enforcement roles, and the variety and the need for each one of those roles is vastly different. We have got to do a better job of understanding the unique roles, be it a patrol officer, an investigator, analyst, dispatch, a 911 operator that needs to interact with information. We've got to be able to understand the roles of law enforcement. We have to also respect that states are very unique. This is something that has taken me a while to finally wrap my head around. It's very easy from the federal government's perspective to look down and say, we need a national standard. That's great, but we do live in a republic, and the states get a vote. And states are very unique, and if we're going to push a strategy that's going to be meaningful, we have to do it in a way that's respectful of the role that the states are playing. Let's see. Yeah, a reluctance, we heard a little bit about this yesterday. A reluctance to participate in nationwide information sharing makes those communities less safe. I'll be honest with you, I'm tired of talking about this one, okay? I'm tired of the situation where after something bad happens, you find out that you had information that existed in someone's records management system, but for whatever reason, it hadn't been shared. It wasn't available to another agency or somebody that could have used that information to either apprehend or to stop a crime. I'm tired of hearing that one agency will share with the world, but they don't want to share with the agency next door because of some kind of political competition. The truth is, they make their own communities less safe. They are making their own communities less safe. And quite honestly, what needs to be done is we need to shine a light on those decisions. We need to shine a light on those, I'll call them selfish motivations that keep agencies from participating in information sharing, and allow that light to be illustrated through the media, through common understanding that if you don't participate in information sharing, appropriate information sharing, you're making your community less safe. Another area that is a challenge is proprietary information sharing alone. We have a number of situations where we share within small communities, be it a single company, a single region, a single metropolitan area. So we have these information sharing, and quite honestly, we sometimes pat ourselves on the back and say, I share information within this community. But we have to get to a point where that we recognize that information sharing limits us. We've got to get to a place where even if you're sharing and working within a community, within a group of agencies, within a region, that information has to make its way in some form or fashion to be available for national information sharing. We have conflicting and complex data standards. We continue to struggle with the fact that we start all new projects at the beginning with coming up with our own standards, coming up with our own way we're going to share information. We have to solve that. One of the areas that I'm specifically focused on right now is that of NIBRS and index. So our National Data Exchange certainly is a central element to the way we believe that law enforcement should be sharing incident information. And certainly NIBRS. We've talked about NIBRS here today. NIBRS has become a feature element of the criminal justice strategy to understand crime and allow for not only policy, appropriate policy, but also for policing to adjust based upon that crime. And yet those two standards cannot coexist in a similar package. And one is, NIBRS is based upon crime activities, criminal activity. Index is based upon incident activity. We have to find a way to bring those things together, because at the end of the day, that's what we're asking the people in this room to do. We're asking you to make sense of things like NIBRS and index in a similar reporting environment. So we have to move to a place where we make these reporting standards less complex and more consistent. And then finally, something I'm going to talk a little bit more about here, and that's the CJIS systems, a point of inflection, right? All of these things, many of these things that I've talked about here, if someone were to just look at the way the CJIS division has organized our systems, you would say, but you didn't, right? That would be an adequate thing. Today it requires multiple systems, sometimes getting you different results based upon the way you ask the question and which system you've asked the question of. And we have what I'll call our competing priorities. Sometimes when we approach our constituency, everybody knows that we utilize the CJIS Advisory Policy Board with priorities to be able to speak to our law enforcement partners. Frequently, I've got NGI telling that same customer base, this is the most important thing that you need to do. NCIC, no. This is the most important thing that you need to do. No, index, this, tips. Everybody is focused on different priorities. And I don't believe from the CJIS division that that's an appropriate use of our time. Come on. There we go. So, not to belabor the point, but this is how we were previously organized. We were organized in a way that had, in some cases, the next generation identification, our biometrics criminal history repository separated from NCIC, from index, from our other service lines. The little spiel that I just gave you about, I think it's unconscionable that we operate and manage our systems that way. I think I told that story to one too many people, and so they've made a change. And the change was that we would reorganize. We would create this new branch called the Identification and Investigative Services Branch, and I would lead that, essentially putting in one branch of the CJIS division all of those systems and services that are directly facing our state, local, tribal, federal law enforcement community. We're organized now in a way, now I don't have the IT anymore, and I was always the IT guy. I get a little nervous every time I think about that. But I think it's a good change because it actually creates a CJIS division that I believe from the outside is more coherent. It creates these three main lines of business. We have the line of business that I'm going to manage, which is the identification and investigative services. We know those systems, right? We've been talking about them here, NCIC, NICS, Index. But those are core services that are relied upon from our NICS gun background check. NICS uses all of those services to be able to adjudicate a gun background check. It's also used by our National Threat Operations Section and National Threat Operations Center for adjudicating tips and threats. So this is kind of the idea of the CJIS division being created, being modeled, we believe, more appropriate and more consistent with the way policing is done. So we've had some recent successes that I think have moved us forward. The first is we heard a little bit today about the reliance and the need for integration with 911 centers. The National Threat Operations Center in the National Threat Operations section, somebody said a few years ago, it's kind of like a nationwide 911. So we've kind of embraced that, and we now have 911 connectivity. We work within the PSAP. We now have the ability, when we receive a call, to directly refer that call into the appropriate 911 center that can actually do something with the caller. I don't have it on this slide, but that also includes now direct 988 capability. Director Roush mentioned earlier the idea of the mental health and the people who are in distress calling in. I still don't know why, if somebody is in distress, having an emotional crisis, why they call 1-800-CALL-FBI, but they do. And our people have talked more than a few individuals off the proverbial ledge and got them the help that they need. But we're not experts in that. And so the ability to connect those individuals, warm connect them, not just send them off, warm connect them with somebody, with a counselor who can actually help them. We've been working with inlets. Where's my inlets person? There you are. Sorry, I lost you in the room. I knew I was going to get you in here somewhere. So the CJIS division and inlets have a tremendous history together. We've now begun using inlets to push tip information, tip and threat information directly to the agencies that need to receive that tip or that threat. A few years ago, Sheriff Mike Milstead from Minnehaha County in South Dakota, Mike Milstead said, hey, this is great. The FBI gets all these tips and you disposition about 30% of them and you do something with them, but there's a whole bunch of other tips that are sitting in your database that might be meaningful to me and you're just sitting on them. And you wait until after something critical happens to point back and say, well, yeah, I did receive a tip about that. Why don't you get it to me? Within 12 months, we went from Mike criticizing us about that to implementing via inlets and directly through direct messaging through NCIC, the ability to directly get those tips into the hands of people who actually need them. Not necessarily threat to life tips, but the notion that when you get a tip that seems a bit odd, it's not something you just want to file 13. It feels like it's got some value, doesn't have a federal nexus, it's not a threat to life. That might be the one little piece of information that an agency or an officer needs in order to prevent a crime. So we've also been sharing those tips and threats through Index. So Maria mentioned earlier that it has not always been the case that the FBI has been really forthcoming with information. I will tell you right now, we are putting as much information into Index, sharing with inlets, putting it out through NCIC as our attorneys right now will allow us. I'll also tell you that we have projects and initiatives to try to get the attorneys to allow more. We are pushing for more information. And so we're sharing that tip and threat information through Index, and we're trying to get more information sharing. We're using Index now to fill critical gaps within our gun background check process. In 2022, a law was passed called the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act. It was enacted and implemented in 2023. This put an additional responsibility on the FBI for under 21 gun purchasers. And part of that responsibility was that we needed to reach out to individual agencies to find out whether or not they knew something that hadn't been submitted to the NICS index or wasn't in our national repository. We reach out to agencies. We reach out to mental health commissioners in the areas that those individuals live and the areas where they're purchasing the firearm. But being able to have information in index that's used for gun background checks has expedited a lot of that process. And then the FBI CJIS division has recently become the caretaker, if you will, the business owner of a system that we call eGuardian. eGuardian is the connective tissue between tips and threats, national security tips and threats in many ways, between state and local law enforcement and the larger Fusion Center community. We are now the business owner for that. We still don't manage the technology, but the idea of bringing all of that into a coherent strategy so that our tip and threat sharing is understandable. Two other things that didn't make it on this list, and I'm scratching my head why. The first one is NIBRS. NIBRS, from an information sharing perspective, we're now at right around the 85% of population coverage with our NIBRS. That's growing. We've got other agencies ready to come on. And when I say we, I really mean you, because that work ultimately falls to your agencies to make sure that you are ready, you're collecting, and you're submitting that incident-based reporting. And then the other thing around UCR and NIBRS is that by the end of this year, we're looking at maybe October or November, we want to try to get to a place where we're releasing crime data monthly. I say that, and I have a lot of people go, what? You know, monthly crime data release? We think it's important. Today, law enforcement agencies find themselves in, I will call them a part of the supply chain. They collect this information up, they use it for their purposes, but then they submit it into this process called Uniform Crime Reporting and NIBRS. And the delay in releasing that data, getting that data back to a place where it's visible again, is so long that it's frequently not helpful for law enforcement. It's helpful for policy, it's helpful for academia and research, but it's not helpful for law enforcement. What we want to do is we want to shorten that delay time. We want to get that data out as quickly as we can get it in. That said, that's going to put additional responsibilities. Those responsibilities, as I said, this is an ecosystem. Those responsibilities are going to matriculate down to each one of your organizations. And I do believe that once we start releasing monthly information, I do believe that the public is going to expect more. I think the public is going to say, okay, additional information is available. Why isn't my agency part of that monthly data release? Why don't I see their data? Why hasn't my state provided any information during this cycle? I think that is a good thing because you're going to get greater attention on the problem. So one of the things that I frequently talk about, and if you've had a one-on-one conversation with me anytime in the past year, I will give you and I will talk to you about this vision that I have for law enforcement information sharing. Again, what we've talked about so far is kind of the successes, small steps, some of the challenges that we've had, but there's, and I apologize, in poor chartsmanship format, there's a lot of words on the slide. I'll just kind of talk you through them. The first is that law enforcement agencies need to be able to connect to a fabric, to a, Paul would use the phrase, knowledge graph. Sorry, the word escaped me there for a moment. And knowledge graph would be used in order to implement that kind of a data fabric. It is essential that we get out of this mindset, and from the CJIS division, this is a big step, people, to get out of this mindset of I will collect have, and hold all of your information and then set the sharing rules for putting that data back out. That is limiting us right now. We must get to a place where agencies, states can participate in this broader network of information sharing such that they never lose control of their information. It's always their information in case it needed to be expunged, changed, updated. It's always their information. We need to move to a place with that. We need to get to a place where agency data is aggregated at the state level. And if I were just to put a bullet on this, it's the notion that we need to respect the uniqueness of states, as I mentioned earlier, to be able to provide a statewide analytics framework for each state, so that each state has that, and the ability to aggregate data from those agencies allows us to be respectful of the uniqueness of each state. Access to this fabric has to be, I overuse this word, ubiquitous. Somebody's going to, quote Princess Bride and say, I don't think that word means what you think it means. But access to the fabric has to be, in my words, ubiquitous, okay? Today, if you're operating within one of your systems, if you're operating within a records management system, you don't have direct access into, we'll use the term index data. You have to step out of that, come to index and query index, or you have to step out of that and go to another data sharing system, query that in order to have access to that. We need the ability to make sure that the data that is known, national data that's known, is available right there within your tools on your platforms, the ability to search that at any time. The other thing that we want to do is we want to engage more NCIC, and this is huge, especially with my recent change of role, is this notion that NCIC is for one thing but index is for another. Wouldn't it be great if when you run an NCIC query, if I brought back that other index information with that NCIC query, even if it wasn't all the information, even if it was just a pointer saying additional information exists. The idea is not to create these silos and stovepipes where individuals have to go to a certain system in order to get certain information and a different system to get potentially competing or complementary information. Yeah, that's what I just said. Also, the implementation of a subscription capability. And I think this is important. We've got to move to a place where agents, the agents, officers, and analysts are not always requested to ask a very specific question about an individual, but instead they could say, I work gangs in this zip code, right? I work gangs in this zip code. If I get a threat, if there's an arrest, if there's an incident that involves gangs in that zip code, I want to know. These are subjects of interest. To be able to be on the lookout for those individuals. It's probably a poor term with this audience, but to basically watch out for any kind of activity on certain subjects. The ability for the ecosystem to recognize those events and to alert, to be able to manage those subscriptions, and not even have to, as an individual, always step back in and execute a query. One of the things that I always find fascinating is today, if I run a query on somebody, and I don't get a result, or I get very limited information, the investigation is going to continue on. If something happens 2, 3, 4, 5 weeks later, I'm still interested, but you're not going to get that information unless you log back in and query one more time. We need the ability to those queries to be resident for a period of time so that each of those queries might be able to bring additional, more contemporary information back to you. We also want to move to a place where alerts by the FBI and others are posted immediately on the fabric and available to those subscribing agencies. Today, one of the struggles that we have is trying to get data to the exact individual, to the exact, what you want is when a tip comes in, you want to be able to drop it on the person's head that actually needs that tip. If you could get to a place where people are subscribing about certain kinds of crime, individuals, networks in a certain area, you get one step closer to the ability of being able to do that. So at a high level, this is the vision that I keep espousing. I'll tell you that the FBI is moving in this direction. We're spending a lot of time thinking about how our business line is going to change, how we're going to integrate the conversation around systems and move that more to services that are facing policing. I love both the speakers, all the speakers that spoke before me. I think it's very helpful to think about things in the broader ecosystem. In fact, I said, oh, law enforcement. Maybe I need to say policing, as I got down after the director's comments. But then after the previous speaker's comments, I'm thinking, it's not even a law enforcement, it's not even a policing ecosystem. It's a societal ecosystem. It's this notion that anytime we slice the domain and call it a criminal justice domain, we're losing the fact that there might be some causality outside of criminal justice. There might be some connectivity that we need to be aware of. So as we look at all of this, I just think that we need to move more to a place where data can coexist and doesn't rely upon strategies of the FBI or anybody holding, having, and then sharing that information back out. So that's where we're headed. Do I have time for questions? I think I went long. We're good.
I have a quick question. Hey, Brian. It's Brian.
Hey, Brian.
Great to see you, Brian.
Nice to see you, Brian. I like your name.
Yeah. Spelled with an I.
Perfect.
Yes, sir. We talked a lot about the vision, challenges, and opportunities, and I know this is sort of a segue for some conversations tomorrow, but what are when you consider the human factor in success, what are some of the positives that you're seeing, and what are some of the challenges that we may have to face?
So one of the positives is that as I've presented this story, this vision, I can't think of anybody yet who has said, that's dumb, okay? Most people look at this and go, that's intuitive. That's intuitive. It's where you would want to go. You can argue about the technologies. So I think one of the human successes out of this is that I think by and large, people for a very long time have looked at this problem and seen what we're now talking about is just undoable. Maybe because of the FBI. Maybe because of the way we have so fragmented data that the community looks at it and says, I still have to have NCIC here, and I still have to have index there, and I still have to have my criminal history and III there. So I think if we can remove that impediment, I think the human part of it is that I think people buy into this. Now, the challenge is policy. The challenge is around we have all of these legal structures and controls. NCIC, heck, you could find legislation where people actually write in, you can query NCIC. How horrible is that to actually put a system? What you really want to say is you have the ability to query criminal justice information, right? NCIC is just a slice of that. So, we have to navigate some of that policy. We have to navigate some of my security brethren in the room. It's really nice when you can slice a system and say, it's for this, it contains this, therefore I know how to secure this. It's a little more complicated when it becomes all of that data and you're now doing attribute-based, user-based controls. Now, it just takes a little more effort, but my security team at CJIS is all over it, loves the idea. It's just a matter of getting all of the policies outlined. Did that answer your question, Brian? Okay. Yes, sir.
Hey, also named Brian, so just
great.
There you go.
Is that serious? You're not just
No, with an I.
Could you put us all at one table next time? That would be great.
So I felt like I had to ask a question because of the Brian thing. But a lot of your vision is based on the RMS vendors being able to do what you're asking them to do. But then I'm curious as to what your position is on agencies selecting those RMS vendors, and do you feel like there'll be a time where even if the the RMS vendors that can do everything you want, it's still up to the agency to actually implement those vendors. Do you see a concern there of like not requiring it, that they use somebody that can do what you want, or still giving them the option eventually, always giving them the option? Where do you see your vision?
So standing here in a government role, in a federal role, there's trying to remember the name of the term, but basically the government cannot direct state or local agencies to take any specific action. We cannot. It would be considered like obviously if a law is passed, we can do that, but the federal government can't do that. And so the best we can do is incentivize. The best we can do is to try to bring people along to the notion of nationwide information sharing. The other thing is I think there's plenty of room in this market for variability. You need standards and information sharing with the ability to have uniqueness and feature variability. So the solution that might be right for one agency might be entirely wrong for another agency. But at its core, if it's sharing information, it can still be very helpful, and these things can coexist. What I was mentioning before, I still think is the right answer, which is visibility and transparency. Make sure when somebody makes a decision not to participate in sharing, that's a visible and known reality. The other thing is, and we did not do this when we implemented Index, and quite honestly, if I could roll back the clock, I might change it. We didn't charge people for access to Index. We never wanted that to be a fee producer. But we should have said, you can have access to this rich information if you provide access, if you provide your information. The buy-in should have been the demand for information sharing. Because instead, we've got communities that basically say, I'll take anything you want to share with me, but I'm gonna protect everything that I have here. I think as we move forward, that needs to be something that needs to be addressed too. Agencies need to have a buy-in through information sharing in order to get shared information. Another Brian? Oh. Brianna? Okay, we'll take that. We'll take that. I was never allowed to do that. 3 daughters, never allowed to do that. I know you're not Brianna.
No, my name is Linda, actually.
That's not your badge. I'm like, that's not her name.
So I'm curious. My company is a drone detection company. We have a contract with the Air Force that's funded in part by Georgia Department of Corrections, some state law enforcement agencies, to accelerate the development of a collaborative drone detection network. So my question is, does your team have input to something like that? Is there someone we could work with to get your needs as we build this out incorporated?
So you're building the fabric for drone collection, and is this a national fabric? Is this
That's our plan.
that's a plan? We absolutely would want to participate. We can get you that information. I guess where I would like to see this is that just as when the FAA decided to build airports, they didn't go into the airlines business. They built the airports, they built the infrastructure that then commercial entities ride. That's where I think we need to be. I think the fabric, the sharing environment is something that the government it's a rightful space for the government to operate in, and then allow for competition within the jointly collaborative space. Delta and United United's still around. They have to coexist on that space. They have to cooperate. It's the exact same situation for our environment.
Brian, since you called me out, I just want to publicly commend you for articulating a vision, the likes of which many of us for years have only dreamed about. But you've put it down into a real approach to how FBI can really serve this community in ways that it's never done before. And I just am blown away by how well you've put all that together. I think it's really imperative that you think about this in your new role, about how you integrate all of the functions and features that the FBI can serve so that there's a unified response, not just for index and NIBRs, which are, that alone would be a substantial move, but people really want a response that includes e-guardian and the use of force and all of those things, and the unified response, a person-based response and a vehicle-based response that covers all of those things. But the other thing that I hope you'll think about, and you probably already are, of how you integrate that with the edge of the enterprise. Because we're at a stage, as you've articulated, where we're not only talking about law enforcement, we're talking about the 3 Ps that we heard about earlier, but you know, in the Criminal Indicators Working Group that BJS put together, we talked about the fact that the purpose of law enforcement is more about community wellness, not law enforcement. And that broader mission means you're going to want responses that deal with housing, as we heard today, that deal with mental health, that deal with things outside the criminal justice enterprise. That response needs to be integrated as well, and that's the next generation for you to consider.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would go back to, thank you, by the way, you're again too kind. The idea that again, we've siloed systems is one aspect, but we've also siloed the entire criminal justice domain. And this idea that the data that's impactful on that is much broader than what even a law enforcement agency would be collecting. Sorry, a policing agency. I'm going to change my language. I thought that was a great comment this morning. Thank you, Paul. I think lunch is upon us. Thank you all. I really appreciate this.